Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very happy to see so many of you joining from all over the world to learn about the Master of Global Affairs. My name is Becca Méndez. I'm the Associate Director of the Master of Global Affairs, and I'm also an alum of the program. I have my Master's in International Peace Studies. My previous work is based in Paraguay as a Peace Corps volunteer and in Colombia, where I was researching the Colombian peace agreement. Today, I'm going to spend about 15 minutes talking and giving an overview of the Master of Global Affairs. And while I'm speaking, please feel free to submit more questions through the Q&A feature. And after I present, I'll be joined by my colleague Ty Lavers, and we'll spend some time talking through your questions. So the Master of Global Affairs is a 2-year professional graduate program. And we're looking for change makers, people who want to scale up their ability to impact issues of peace, development, governance, and policy. The Master of Global Affairs cohort is always very intentionally diverse. More than half of each of our previous cohorts have been international students. And students in our program come from more than 55 countries, and they're all listed here. So if you don't see your country of origin on the list, that's even more reason to apply, because we really deeply value perspectives from many cultures and backgrounds. And I'll tell you that students often say that one of the most enriching parts of the program is the opportunity to learn alongside classmates from all over the world. The Master of Global Affairs offers different paths to create an educational experience that aligns with your specific interests and career path. At the point of applying to the program, you're going to need to choose one of the concentration areas in which to specialize, either sustainable development, international peace studies, or governance and policy. And there's a lot of mixing and matching once you're in the program, but I want to let you know that the concentration that you select at the admissions process has implications for the content and the structure of your study. So if I could give you a tip, I would say that you'll be most competitive for the concentration which has the best alignment with your passions and your career trajectory. So I'd really encourage you to research and think carefully about that choice. Regardless of which concentration you choose, you're going to take foundational courses in your first year with the idea of preparing you to work in peace, development, or governance and policy. And the first year is also intended to lay a foundation for your field experience. And we'll talk a little bit more about the field experience in a minute, but depending on your concentration, you're going to spend either the summer or your entire third semester working with a global organization. In your second year, you'll have a lot of space to take electives from the Keough School of Global Affairs or other graduate programs around campus. In your second year, you'll also write a capstone paper or create a deliverable product to wrap up your field experience. So both the electives and your experience in the field are intended to open up a space for you during your graduate study to develop a depth of specialization in a region or a topic of your choice. For example, you might pursue coursework or a field experience focusing on any of these topic areas listed here. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but it's just a sampling of some of the areas where you might pursue specializations. We have the philosophy here in the Masters of Global Affairs that each student's journey should be unique. And so you as a student in the program determine your path in close consultation with advisors and faculty. And because it's a small cohort, students in the program receive a lot of really personalized mentoring from quite an impressive array of faculty. In the Master of Global Affairs, we place a lot of emphasis on hands-on experience. So MGA students work with global organizations that are dedicated to peace, development, governance, and policy. There are essentially 2 practicum models in the program. And I want you to take note of how your choice of concentration has structural implications for your study and for what your field experience looks like. Sustainable development and governance and policy students participate in the integration lab, or the iLab. This is a year-long partnership with a global partner organization, which includes 2 months in the field between academic years. Peace studies students do fieldwork in their 3rd semester, and they spend 6 months in an international internship with a peace building organization. And the Kroc Institute in particular has a long history of relationships and alumni throughout the world to connect students with those internships. So while the students are in the field, they conduct independent research with the coaching of a faculty advisor, and the research serves as the basis for their capstone project. So there are the 2 field experience models, but both have a lot in common in the sense of placing an emphasis on learning through experience, bridging the knowledge you gain in the classroom with the practice of working with communities. And both experiences are designed to train you to approach global problems with complexity. If you're interested in examples of fieldwork opportunities, I'd welcome you to take a look at the Keough Insider blog. This is a place where you could learn more about student experiences in the field over the last few years. In some cases throughout the pandemic, students have adopted to virtual engagement with global partner organizations when international travel wasn't possible. And we've also expanded opportunities for field experiences in the United States. 3 of our international students recently conducted a project on climate justice in United States cities with an organization called the National League of Cities. Another example in the picture on the far right, you can see Peace Studies student Nate Van Duzer, who did an internship with the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And you can even see him holding the Nobel Peace Prize there in the picture. I also want to highlight some of our faculty who bring their depth of global affairs experience and share it with our students. I would say that often students coming into our program come from backgrounds of work experience at a grassroots and community level. That's not always the case, but for all students throughout the program, we want to work with you to build the skills you'll need to scale up the level at which you can impact change. Because regardless of where you aspire to work after the program, we feel that you need to be able to understand how to interpret and impact policy. So one way we prepare you to do this is through opportunities to interact with leaders and change makers from the policy world through your courses and through opportunities at our office in Washington, DC. If I could give you another tip for applying, I would really encourage you to take a look at our website and familiarize yourself with the breadth of faculty experience. Another huge opportunity at the Keough School of Global Affairs is the wide variety of institutes. I've listed the shorthand version of their names and a sketch of their areas of expertise on this slide, because more and more students are connecting with these institutes to find research opportunities, grant funding, travel opportunities, and connecting with faculty and staff members who are based within those institutes. So at the Keough School of Global Affairs, you'll find a lot of diversity, but what you'll also find is that we have in common the commitment to integral human development. And this is basically the idea that we try to keep human dignity at the center of all of our peace building, development, governance, and policy work. So let's talk for a minute about what you can do after receiving this graduate degree. A Master of Global Affairs is very versatile. When students graduate from the program, they go on to pursue careers as change makers in a lot of different contexts, at the government level, NGOs and civil society organizations, multilateral organizations, and some even go into the private sector. I've highlighted on this slide organizations where our grads have been hired within the last 5 months. And previous graduates have worked at places such as the UN Foundation, Food for Peace, Friends Committee on National Legislation, and some go on to work at the ministries of their home governments. We've also had 4 recent graduates who were recipients of the Presidential Management Fellowship. Throughout your 2 years in the program, we provide personalized career support to help you discern your strengths, develop your, refine the skills you'll need for your job search, and connect with alumni and employers. This primarily happens through a series of participatory workshops called the Career Colloquium. And students are involved in the Career Colloquium each semester of the program. So this is a space where you'll discern your path and sharpen your tools to get a job after graduation. And we're very proud to say that 100% of the class who graduated in May 2021 are already employed or pursuing further study. And I also wanted to share that for the class before them who graduated in peak COVID pandemic in May 2020, 95% of them were employed or pursuing further study within 6 months of graduation. And that's been a pretty consistent statistic throughout our graduating classes. So the summary point after all of this is that we really encourage you to apply. We're looking for people who want to pursue careers promoting peace, working towards more just governance and policy, and advancing sustainable development. Our application is due on December 15th, and that would be to begin the program in fall of 2022. On this slide, you'll see a list of the required components of an application. I know one of the common questions is always about scholarship. So I want to assure you that for the students whom we admit, we provide very generous funding, and that's done on the basis of merit first. And we also consider student need when we assign financial aid. So to be competitive for those scholarships, the most competitive applicants have strong academic backgrounds, ideally at least 2 years of professional experience in a culture or a country that's not their own, proficiency in English and a second language, and strong letters of recommendation. And I would encourage you that between now and mid-December, when you submit your application, especially take time to get a lot of feedback on your essays. Try and take the opportunity to share it with as many people and get their insights so that that can be as well written as possible. So just to wrap up this portion, I want to emphasize that in the Master of Global Affairs, you're going to have opportunities to gain practical hands-on experience through fieldwork. You'll be learning alongside classmates from all over the world, and you'll have the support of some incredible mentors as you discern your career path. So those of us at the Keough School of Global Affairs, we're looking for a diverse group of change makers. And so I hope that you will plan to apply for the program by December 15th. Here is the contact information. If you have follow-up questions about the program or the admissions process, you can certainly send us an email at the email address listed there. So I know we have many questions that you submitted prior to the event and as I've been presenting. So at this point, we're going to turn to the questions you've submitted, and I'll be joined by my colleague, Ty Lavers, to help us talk through those questions.
Hi, Becca. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. As Becca mentioned, I'm a colleague of hers at the Keough School of Global Affairs. I've been following along in the Q&A section of the webinar for this first portion of our session. We have a lot of great questions coming in. So Becca, if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and just get started with a lot of these questions. And I'd like to remind everyone that we've left quite a bit of time here for us to respond to your questions during this webinar. So please feel free to use that Q&A button that should be at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions while we continue here. The first question that I'd like to ask Becca is one that was submitted actually in advance of today's webinar, and that is, how is the Master of Global Affairs program unique from other similar master's programs?
That's a question I get a lot, especially from students who might be looking at other programs in the United States, perhaps on the East Coast or in Boston. And so I would highlight a few things. One, as I mentioned earlier, we have a really international and culturally diverse student body. It's a small cohort, and since we don't have a PhD program within the Keough School for Global Affairs, the students get a lot of the faculty's attention because of that. I would also say we fully fund the field experience that our students have, and that grows out of the value that we have for making sure that our students are actually getting hands-on experience. And I'm not sure that that's the case in all programs. And I would say another component of what makes us unique is the normative commitment to peace building, justice, and advancing human flourishing. And the Master of Global Affairs grows out of the Master of International Peace Studies, the Keough Institute of Peace Studies, which has long been a globally recognized institute for studying peace with a 30-year history of training peace builders. So I would say those are some of the key things that I would highlight.
Great, thank you. And I think it is important to mention that connection that the Keough School does have with the Keough Institute for International Peace Studies. And we're building on this program that's been around for over 30 years and has a well-established, reputable alumni network around the world. You mentioned the field experience, Becca, as being an important differentiator for our program. And we do have some questions about the field experience that have come in. One of them is about the iLab, and specifically, could you share any examples of projects or organizations that students have worked with through their integration lab experience?
Yeah, I would be happy to. And I inevitably will leave some of them out because there's like such a rich menu of options that students have pursued over the last few years. So the website and the Keough blog will show kind of the whole array of organizations, but a few that stand out in my mind have been students that worked with Catholic Relief Services to work in the communities where they help displaced persons, and Catholic Relief Services ask the students to help them get from the people that they work with what a sense of home means to them, because they were finding that the project was not as sustainable as they were hoping. And so that was a really cool project that the students did in Bangladesh. And one long-running program that students have opted for each year of the program has been with the Chilean public sector in focusing on education. And this is a project called Enseña Chile. And so our students have worked with Enseña Chile to help improve the education sector in that country. But there's been so many options. And one question, Ty, that I get frequently from prospective students is, how is the process for getting matched up with a project? Like sometimes students come in with a really clear idea that they want to be working on gender issues or climate issues, or they want to be working in the Middle East. And so I wanted to highlight that process of matching students with a global partner organization through the iLab and through the Peace Studies internship, it's a really dynamic process that involves a lot of like student participation and voice. So typically what happens in the iLab is during your first semester, you get introduced to a menu of options, often somewhere around like 10 or 14 different projects, which you rank, and your classmates will also be ranking as well. And then from that, the ranking of the students coalesce into teams. And this is a iterative process where you're talking with the program directors about your preferences. And often I encourage students to evaluate whether or not they want to either go deeper in a region or topic where they've already got some expertise, or use the opportunity of the iLab or the internship to gain more breadth and go to a country that they've never been to, or a region that's new to them, and use this opportunity within the Master of Global Affairs to kind of like broaden their profile.
Great. We have a lot of questions coming in, and I'm actually really pleased to share with everyone as well that we have people joining us from all over the world. I'm just looking at my screen here and I see people from Bangladesh, Colombia, Uganda, Nigeria, Cameroon. I'm sure I'm not including everyone here, but thank you for everyone who's sending us introductions to yourselves and asking your questions. Another question related to the program and the student experience is COVID. How has COVID affected learning for students at the University of Notre Dame and within the Keough School's Master of Global Affairs? And to build on that, how might that continue in this coming year?
Yeah, that's an important question. One thing that I would emphasize is that throughout the pandemic, with the exception of a few weeks here and there, the University of Notre Dame has continued to give in-person instruction. So despite the pandemic, we have students here in the classroom. And the biggest, I would say the two ways that it impacted the program the most was that those who were supposed to go to the field in June of 2020 basically had to fully pivot their expectations and their engagement with their field organizations to do so virtually. And that obviously that was very disappointing for a lot of the students, but what we observed and reflected as a community here at the Keough School is that organizations across the world that were working on peace, sustainability, governance, policy, all of those organizations were also pivoting to a virtual mode of engagement. So the skills that our students gained in engaging internationally with these global issues from South Bend, Indiana, it was also a great practical experience for them. And the second largest way that it impacted us is the challenges that a lot of international students faced in getting visas to come into the United States in fall of 2020. And so we actually adapted our curriculum just a bit to accommodate the students coming from abroad who needed to come a semester later, and we made that exception. I would say at this point, what we have done as all of our students have gotten vaccinated and are back in in-person classes, it's been an impetus for us to further diversify the types of field experiences our students pursue, because for some, it's not practical or feasible to leave the United States to go to the field and come back in. And so we have on our menu of field experience options, opportunities to go abroad as we always have. But now we've got opportunities to work in the United States with global affairs organizations, or to engage in international organizations from a virtual in a virtual way. So I think that there's been a lot of lessons learned for the program coming out of the pandemic.
Great, such an important question. Here's one related to career support for students. You mentioned during the presentation earlier some of the career paths for graduates of this program. This question is asking how the school helps students find those jobs or obtain jobs after graduation. So maybe you could just revisit that portion briefly that you mentioned earlier in the webinar about career support.
Of course. Yeah, it's really important because as a professional master's program, our conceptualization is that we are preparing the students to go on into careers in working in this in a practical way. And so that's really the North Star of the program, is preparing you for this. So I'm going to highlight 4 ways that I think that happens, that preparation. Obviously, through your courses, the faculty are often come in with both academic and policy and professional experience. And the idea is that the coursework is training you for the work that you'll eventually go on to do in the field. Second, the field experience very obviously is a space for you to explore, like, what level am I interested in making change? Am I more engaged at the grassroots level, or am I really interested in working at impacting change at the policy level, or somewhere in between? And it helps you kind of evaluate topic areas of interest, or the types of regions where you might want to work. Third, I would say a really important component of the Master of Global Affairs is the mentorship that students receive. And this happens on a lot of different levels. You'll obviously have a faculty advisor who will help you select your courses, but more and more students are developing mentoring relationships with other faculty as they work with them as research associates, or engaging with institutional homes, like a second institutional home at the different institutes and centers under the umbrella of the Keough School. And we connect students with other alumni, with organizations, with our advisory board. And so depending on the students' interest in engaging with mentors, I think there's a lot of opportunities there. Not even to mention the Notre Dame Alumni Network, which is very huge and very solicitous in helping people connect with opportunities. And I haven't even gotten to the most important one yet, which is the space where all of this tends to live, in a way, is called the Career Colloquium. So each semester of the Master of Global Affairs, students participate in the Career Colloquium, which is essentially 6 or 7 workshops that are dedicated to you having the space to discern your career path and connect with people in line with that path, and then sharpen your skills for your job search. So we have learned over the program how important it is to carve out intentional space for that from the beginning. And so it's not the only space where professional development lives, because the Graduate School of Notre Dame has a very rich career support office as well. But it's an intentional space that we create for students to engage in this.
Great. I'm going to switch to a few, what I'm going to call quick fire question and answers that should be easy for you to respond to quickly. Sure. That I'm seeing come through. And a lot of them are related to who is the ideal candidate or the application process. So here's our first quick fire question. Can I apply, or should I apply, if I already have a master's degree?
Yes, but I can't help but add a little disclaimer. If your master's program is very similar to a Master of Global Affairs, for example, if you already have a master's in conflict resolution or sustainable development, I think the impetus will be on you to explain what you would be getting out of the Master of Global Affairs that would be different from or enhance the previous master's study you already have.
Great. Here's the second one. Can I apply if I have a background or an undergraduate degree that may not be totally related to global affairs? And here are some of the specific examples that people have asked about. What if I have a background in media, communications, or my undergraduate degree is in science? It's not necessarily in something related to global affairs. Should I still apply?
Great, yes. We emphasized a lot in this presentation the emphasis on international diversity, but we also are looking for intellectual diversity and backgrounds. So we have admitted students who have engineering backgrounds, who were on a med school path, who came from an undergraduate major in biology. And we really feel strongly that lots of different profiles are important for not only putting students in conversation with each other, but for ultimately, making change on these issues. So please, yes, we welcome applicants from all different backgrounds.
Great. When is the application deadline?
December 15th.
if a student doesn't have all of their materials prepared by December 15th, for example, they do not have their official transcripts yet, what should they do?
So what I tell applicants is that you need to submit all of the things under your control by December 15th. But if your recommenders can't submit their letters by that deadline, or if your university is needing more time or it's challenging to get your transcripts, that can trickle in later. But we do draw the line that December 15th that your essays, your resume, your profile all needs to be submitted by that deadline.
And a follow-up question there. A lot of questions are coming in about the letters of recommendation. Who should be providing those letters of recommendation? And do we require certain kinds of recommenders? For example, does it have to be an academic professor that's providing one of my recommendation letters?
Well, I would say in principle, what applicants should keep in mind is you have only the application to present your whole holistic self to the admissions committee. And so you would want to think carefully about who can speak best to your strengths and who can speak to the different components of you as a student and as a professional. I do think it's very important to have at least one former professor who can speak to your ability to succeed in the classroom. And I would say that people who can speak about your professional experience are also very important. But sometimes we've seen students submit recommendations from our current students, and I would say, like, I would encourage you to get people from your career and your academic path. That makes sense.
Okay. Is the GRE required? And what if I already took another test like the GMAT?
Okay, we don't take the GMAT. We do not require the GRE in this admission cycle, but if students have taken the GRE, they can upload their scores. I want to emphasize again that we really look at applicants holistically. And so we'll look at your academic transcripts, your essays, your recommendations. And if you upload the GRE, that will be taken into account as like one additional data point, but it doesn't, it's not required and doesn't give you any sort of advantage. It's just one more data point on the spectrum.
Some people are asking how they can learn more about the professors in the program and who they will be learning from. And is there a way for them to connect with some of those professors or to explore a little bit further if they have a very specific area of interest?
Absolutely. I think there's two low-hanging fruit. One is I would again encourage you all to look through the Keough website, because faculty profiles highlight what their area of expertise is and also often highlight or link to their publications or their websites or their research. And so I think that's one way to map out who are the faculty that will be teaching your classes. And a second thing, I think a really easy way to connect and engage with the work of the Keough School, and particularly of the faculty, is by attending the many events. And this has been a positive outcome of the pandemic, is that now almost all of our events are in a hybrid mode where you can access them virtually. And so I would say that on all of the websites of the Keough institutes and centers, you can sign up to be a part of the listserv, which notifies you of the events that they're having. And so if you want to learn more, you can connect into those virtual events to hear the professors speak on panels and hear them give presentations about their research.
Great. Building off of kind of the connections that people can make with other units while they're here, I see a question that came in about our Washington office. And the question is, how do students benefit from and engage with the Keough School's office in Washington, D.C.?
Great question. And there's a lot of different levels at which that can happen depending on a student interest. And I'll start with the most straightforward, which is that in the past and currently we've offered in the final semester of the program an opportunity for students to do an immersion trip to DC over their spring break. So the way that we think of it is that students will spend the first 3 semesters going deep into theories and coursework, and then gaining some practical experience in the field. And the idea is that final semester gives you the opportunity to then engage with organizations that might be working on those very topics in which you've been developing expertise, and learn from them and share your own ideas. And so the Washington, D.C. office plays a key role in helping our students identify contacts with whom they can have informational interviews, or opportunities that they can attend conferences or whatnot. And I would say the Washington, D.C. office has a rich array of programming, and students have engaged in that in a lot of different ways, especially those who ultimately want to end up working on the Hill, have leaned in a bit more in engaging with those different opportunities to meet policymakers, leaders, change makers through those programs. And yeah, I would say it looks differently depending on the level at which students want to engage.
Great. I'm going to go back to the application because we have a lot of questions still coming in about the application itself. Some people have asked, how do you go about selecting your concentration of choice? Is that in the application, and are you able to change, or how does that process work for selecting your concentration of choice?
That's a really important question. And the way that you apply for the program is actually by submitting an application to the Notre Dame Graduate School. So once you log into that application, one of the first questions is going to be, to which program are you applying? And then as you fill out your demographic information, there's an option to select your concentration. So you have an opportunity to change your concentration selection up until the point that you submit. And I think this is really important to keep in mind because, as I mentioned in the presentation, the choice you make about concentration, it kind of gets locked in at that point of applying to the program, and that has big implications for the field experience, the content of your courses. And so I would encourage especially to look carefully at the Keough website to get a sense of who those students are, what type of classes they're taking, and then kind of compare and contrast the different field experience opportunities to inform that decision.
And to build off of that, I'll mention too that on the website, we have a nice portion with the curriculum and courses. And for each concentration, we do outline the requirements that are related to each of the concentration. And so for those of you who have questions about economics and statistics, is that a prerequisite or is that required? It depends on your concentration. So I would encourage you to go to the website and look under the Master of Global Affairs curriculum page. What about work experience? You mentioned that an ideal candidate would have at least 2 years of some kind of experience. Can you talk a little bit more about what kind of experience you're looking for? A few of the questions that have come in here. Can I still apply if I don't have professional work experience, but I have volunteer experience? What if I have an internship experience? What if my 2 years or more is kind of staggered? So I had 1 year here, 1 year a bit later in my career. So could you talk a little bit about what you expect from an applicant related to professional and international experience?
Right. Yeah. So as I said earlier, we really value actual practical hands-on experience. And we build that into the program, but we also look for it in the candidates that we admit. And so the answer to all of these questions is that it can look a lot of different ways, but it doesn't have to be paid. It doesn't have to be consecutive. We have applicants who come from countries where it's not really feasible to have 2 years of paid work in sustainable development at an entry level. And so maybe they've patched together experiences of, a little bit of volunteering here, an internship as I was working, at this other organization. We've also had applicants who successfully entered the program whose experience was concurrent with their undergraduate study. So perhaps they were doing internships as they were pursuing their bachelor's degree. And so I think the essence is that we do just value, basically, I think that it makes for richer classroom discussion and richer, engagement with your classmates if you have something to which you can compare and contrast the theories. Because what makes for a really rich classroom discussion is when you're talking about theories of peace building or theories of sustainable development. And you have people from all over the world and people who have worked in different places in the world that can say, well, actually, that doesn't relate to my experience. And that, sparks some really interesting conversations as you're co-creating new theories and approaches to change making. So I hope that answers your question, but the short answer is that we really encourage you to apply and explain to us through your application materials what your experience has meant for you. Whatever that experience has been, if you can explain where you're coming, where you hope to go, and how a master's program helps you get there, that's the type of thing we want to see in an application.
Is there an age requirement for this program?
No, we've had the full spectrum from people in their 20s to people in their 40s. And I would say compared to a normal graduate program, our cohort tends to be on the a little bit older side because we do have the value of, people having lived a little bit of life experience before coming into the program. So we have students with families, either families whom they've brought to the United States with them, or families who, stay in their home country while they come to the US and study. So I think that age shouldn't be a barrier in applying.
I'm going to close out with a lot of questions that have come in throughout this webinar related to financial aid. So I have a list of questions here.
Okay.
Here's the first one. Is financial aid available to all 3 concentrations within the Master of Global Affairs program?
And do you want me to answer these questions one by one?
Yeah.
Okay. The answer is yes, absolutely. We provide really generous funding to students. And as I said earlier, the first evaluation will be based on the merit of your candidacy to the program. And then we will evaluate as well student need. And that's true across the concentration. So we provide a handful of full funding scholarships to both sustainable development and governance and policy students. And international peace studies admitted international peace studies do receive full funding.
Great. So across all 3 concentrations, there's a range of general financial aid available and full tuition scholarships are offered.
Correct.
Okay, great. How do you apply for these scholarships? Is it a separate application? Is it a different deadline?
Great question. So the merit-based scholarships will be evaluated based on the application that you submit to the program. So in that sense, there's no separate application for the merit-based scholarships. If you also want to be considered for need-based financial aid, there is a separate form that you can submit, which asks you to explain basically what resources you have or other factors that you want us to consider when assigning financial aid. And that is actually due around the same time as the final application, but I think you have a little bit of extra time to submit it.
Great. Is there anything else that you want to mention to people about our generous scholarship support?
Well, one thing that I haven't said, that I encourage applicants to look at the faculty profiles, but I think another helpful thing is to also look at the student profiles. And This relates somewhat to your question about financial aid because each of their profiles explains the fellowship that has been generously funded by a donor to support them. But it also explains, what their background is and what they're aspiring to do. And I think that can also be a measure by which you kind of evaluate whether this program is right for you, whether you fit with the program and what we're trying to do, and also, your competitiveness as a candidate for these scholarships.
I'm looking at the clock and we're about out of time, and I have to apologize to people who have submitted questions that we have run out of time to respond to. We received over 100 questions during this webinar. So I am going to hand it over to you, Becca, to close it out with any final words, things we didn't get to, and maybe sharing with people on today's webinar what their next steps could be to learn more.
Great, thanks Ty for helping facilitate the Q&A. So the final thing that I want to say to wrap up is if you have any questions about the process that we haven't gotten to today, the first place I think would be to look at the Keough website. We have a frequently asked questions page, which I've listed here on this slide. And that goes over a lot of the basics of questions. And beyond that, if you have questions about the process or about the program before you submit your application on December 15th, we really welcome your inquiries. So please write to us at this address, keough-admissions@nd.edu. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to reading all your application materials. And we look forward to meeting some of you in our next cohort. So thanks again for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.